They say blood is thicker than water, but in Columbus, Ohio, I learned that greed is thicker than both. Standing in that cold auction room, watching my childhood home, the house I worked 15 years to save $250,000 for, being sold to the highest bidder, felt like the ultimate family betrayal. My own father, Dennis, stood there with a smug grin, his arm around Patricia, the woman he'd chosen over his own daughter. "I spent every cent of your life savings, Susie," he sneered. "You're nothing now. Get out." Welcome to Prime Karma Stories, your home for the most satisfying tales of revenge and justice. We dive deep into family drama and life lessons that prove family karma always finds its way. Dennis thought he had outsmarted me by emptying my accounts to fund his new life with Patricia. He looked at her and winked, as if they had already won the lottery at my expense. But as I looked at the $250,000 receipt in my hand, I realized that some lessons are best taught in public. I didn't cry or scream. I just waited for the auctioneer, Mr. Oak, to call for the final bid. Dennis had no idea that while he was busy stealing my past, I was busy buying his future. The room went silent as the gavel fell, and the look on his face was about to change forever. But to understand how we got to this auction, I have to tell you how my own father turned my life into a living nightmare. Wait until you hear the cruel lie he told the bank just to get his hands on my hard-earned money. I remember the bitter winter mornings in Columbus, scraping thick sheets of ice off my windshield at 5 a.m. just to make it to my double shift on time. For 15 long years, that was my reality. While other women my age were taking cruises to the Caribbean, posting photos of their designer handbags, or enjoying quiet Sunday brunches, I was putting every extra penny into what I called my freedom fund. It wasn't just about the numbers in a bank account. It was about the security I never felt growing up. My mother passed away when I was just a girl, leaving me with a father who always had a hole in his pocket and a heart made of cold, calculated stone. Dennis, I find it hard to even use the word dad now, spent most of his life chasing get-rich-quick schemes that inevitably ended in a pile of debt and excuses. When I started my career in healthcare, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never be the one waiting for a miracle that never comes. I worked as a head nurse, picking up every grueling holiday shift, every overnight rotation, and every weekend that nobody else wanted. I wore the same winter coat for 7 years until the elbows were thin. I packed my own lunches every single day while my coworkers went out to the local bistro. By the time I turned 40, I had achieved the impossible. I had $250,000 sitting in a high-yield account, earmarked for one thing: buying back our family estate that Dennis had lost to the bank years ago. Then came Patricia. She swanned into Dennis's life with her bleached hair and a predatory kind of grace, smelling like cheap perfume and very expensive ambitions. She saw my father as her final meal ticket, but she was smart enough to realize his pockets were empty. It didn't take her long to figure out that I was the one with the real resources. Suddenly, Dennis became helpful. He started talking about family legacy and how much it would mean to my late mother to see that house back in our name. He played me like a seasoned musician, using my own grief and my love for my mother's memory against me. He offered to handle the complex paperwork for the upcoming auction, claiming his old connections in Ohio real estate could secure me a lower starting bid. I wanted so badly to believe he had finally changed. I wanted a father I could be proud of. So, I did the unthinkable. I granted him limited power of attorney specifically for the house purchase, believing he was finally looking out for my interests. I had no idea that while I was on my feet for 12 hours at the clinic, he and Patricia were at the bank, giddy with excitement as they drained every cent of my 15-year sacrifice. They didn't just take the money, they took my youth and every drop of sweat I'd ever shed. But Dennis was so blinded by Patricia's greed that he made one fatal mistake, a mistake that would turn his victory into a legal nightmare. Wait until you hear what Patricia bragged about buying with my money the very next day, thinking I was still completely in the dark. The moment I saw those 3 digits, $140.20 on the bank screen, my breath hitched in my throat. I felt a cold, paralyzing dread wash over me, the kind of family betrayal that leaves you breathless and hollow. My $250,000, 15 years of missed holidays, double shifts, and worn-out coats, was gone. The bank teller confirmed my worst nightmare. My father, Dennis, had used the power of attorney I'd trusted him with to drain the account into his personal name just 48 hours prior. I didn't call. I didn't wait. I drove straight to his place in Columbus, my vision blurred by tears of pure rage. When I arrived, the scene was a punch to the gut. Dennis was sitting on the porch, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, while Patricia was twirling in a new silk dress, her laughter ringing through the air like a taunt. She looked like a woman who hadn't worked a day in her life, and now she was literally wearing my sweat and sacrifice. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with an injustice cruel beyond words. "That money was for the house. It was for Mom's legacy." Dennis didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just leaned back, a smug grin on his face. "You're too young to have that much money anyway, Susie," he said, as if he were doing me a favor. "Patricia and I have plans, and since the auction is tomorrow, I think it's time you moved on. Literally." He stood up and pointed toward the street, where my bags had already been dumped in the dirt. "You're out, Susie. Don't bother coming to the auction. It's over for you." I left that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning desire for family karma. But as I pulled away, I realized Dennis had forgotten one very specific detail about the power of attorney he'd used, and I was going straight to Mr. Oak to confirm it. He thought he had stolen my life, but he had actually just handed me the rope to hang his own reputation. I drove to Mr. Oak's office with my hands still shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. The rain was starting to turn into that heavy, gray Ohio sleet, matching the coldness in my chest. Mr. Oak had been my mother's attorney and the town's most respected auctioneer for decades. He was a man who believed in the law, but more importantly, he believed in the truth. When I burst into his office, soaking wet and gasping for air, he didn't ask questions. He just poured me a cup of black coffee and listened. I told him everything. How Dennis had played the part of the grieving, reformed father just long enough to get his hands on my 15-year sacrifice. I told him about Patricia and the bags of my belongings dumped in the dirt. Mr. Oak adjusted his glasses and spent an hour poring over the power of attorney documents I'd signed. Then, he looked up at me with a grim, knowing smile. "Susie," he said softly, "your father is an arrogant man, and arrogant men always overlook the fine print. He thinks that because he moved that $250,000 into his name, it's officially his. But in this state, a power of attorney used for self-enrichment without explicit written consent is a massive legal red flag." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's planning to use your stolen money to bid on the house tomorrow. He wants to show off for Patricia. But he doesn't realize that I can flag those funds as contested the moment he tries to settle. However, if we do that now, he'll just flee. We need to let him commit." I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, a cold, calculating resolve. I told Mr. Oak about the $300,000 life insurance policy from my mother's side that had matured last month, money Dennis knew absolutely nothing about. We spent the rest of the night setting the trap. I wasn't going to be the victim in the front row. I was going to be the shadow that took everything from him. Wait until you see the look on Dennis's face when the final hammer falls and he realizes he just bought a one-way ticket to his own ruin. The air in the Columbus auction house was thick with the scent of old wood and the nervous energy of the crowd. Dennis sat in the front row, his chest puffed out like a peacock, a man who truly believed he'd finally ascended to a throne he hadn't earned. Patricia was draped over him, her fingers tracing the edge of an expensive catalog, already picking out drapes for a house she didn't own. When Mr. Oak stepped up to the podium and announced the start of the bidding for the $250,000 estate, Dennis didn't waste a second. He threw his hand up with a sneer, shouting out the opening bid with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. He believed he had left me in the dirt with nothing but a broken heart and empty pockets. He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. To him, the $250,000 he had stolen from my life savings made him invincible. Every time an anonymous bidder from the back raised the price, Dennis would bark out a higher number, his face growing more flushed with every increment. He was so caught up in his own ego that he didn't notice Mr. Oak's eyes lingering on the back of the room. When the bid finally hit the $250,000 mark, the exact amount he had drained from my account, Dennis stood up, arms raised in a mock victory. "Sold!" he shouted, preempting the gavel. "It's mine. Susie, I told you to get out. You've lost everything." The room went deathly silent as Mr. Oak brought the gavel down with a thunderous crack. "Sold," Mr. Oak repeated, his voice echoing through the hall. "But not to you, Dennis. The high bidder is the owner of the certified receipt I have right here." Dennis froze. His smug grin vanished, replaced by a mask of confusion and growing dread. "What are you talking about? I have the money. I'm the high bidder." Patricia started to pull at his arm, her eyes wide with sudden panic as she saw the sheriff standing by the door. I stepped forward then, moving through the crowd until I was standing directly in front of him. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. I simply held up the official buyer's receipt. My name was written in bold, permanent ink. I watched as the reality hit him like a physical blow. He had spent 15 years of my hard work, but he had forgotten that my mother's love had provided one last safety net he never knew about. He was bankrupt, exposed, and utterly defeated. I leaned in, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You told me to get out, Dennis, but I'm the owner now. And you? You're trespassing. Leave before I have you arrested. If you believe in justice and love a good karma story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.